I have the pleasure to be introducing a report that we've been working quite strongly in the past few months, and let me give you a little bit of the background of why we're doing this report. Everybody knows that this COP is the COP of credibility, basically, right? That is in the corridors and more strongly these days. But it's also proven to be a COP of integrity and a COP of ambition. And so we are working on three fronts quite strongly. On the one hand side, we're working on the ambition, credibility, and integrity of government pledges. As you all know, we have an initiative called the NDCs We Want, and you can find more information about that initiative on the web. Also, last year, we launched what we call the Blueprint for Corporate Ambition on Climate and Nature, that is setting out what we think is ambition, credibility, and integrity in corporate pledges, and what we are proposing to be a contribution model by companies. So setting their science-based targets validated by the Science-Based Target Initiative and aligned with science with a 1.5-degree trajectory, and abide to the mitigation hierarchy. So first of all, avoid, then reduce, deep decarbonization, then restore, and then at the very end, compensate all residual emissions. And so this third blueprint that we are calling Blueprint for High Integrity Interventions that Work for Climate, People, and Nature, that is the one that we are going to be putting out today, sets out what we think are the principles and the guidelines, and very interestingly, within a framework that connects the dots of the two other efforts that we have, with the local communities at the forefront. And so today I am very happy to be here with Milagros Agrera. She is the Director of Greenhouse Gas Emissions for the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources of Chile, MINAM. And Peru, I'm sorry, I'm very sorry. I cannot get my thing to open today. And so Milagros, thank you so much for being here with us today. And I have Josefina Braña. She's the Vice President for Forest and Climate at WWF US, and working very strongly with us in international. And we have a third speaker that I will introduce her as soon as she has arrived. But without more ado, I hand it over to Josefina to introduce us to the blueprint, but also run through the most important elements of the blueprint. What I think it's so relevant in this blueprint is actually connecting the dots between what I was mentioning before. So connecting ambition, connecting integrity, and connecting credibility, but from the government's perspective, from the local community's perspective, and from the corporate perspective. And I'll be very interested to hear what Milagros has to say, because I think at the moment, countries have, of course, the responsibility to reduce their own emissions, but also they have a big burden in aligning the different financial sources that are coming over into high integrity and at the national level. So without more ado, Josefina, I hand it over to you to run us through the blueprint.
Thank you, Vanessa, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to present some slides to walk you through our blueprint. So I don't know if we can, yeah. I can see it in the screen now. I want to just give a brief introduction in complement to what Vanessa was explaining. We are seeing a growing public and private interest and momentum around nature-based solutions to address the climate and the biodiversity crisis. In this COP in particular, we've seen this momentum growing and many state actors and non-state actors talking about the role of nature. So this is great. We heard earlier last week, a week ago, through the Glasgow Declaration on Forests, political support around this type of solutions and also an economic package that accompany the declaration and that includes a mix of public funds, philanthropy, and private sector commitments to support nature. This is all great and very welcome, but there's also a need to canalize and coordinate well these investments in a way that really are directed to support people, nature, and climate integrally. So this blueprint responds to that momentum and aims to provide some guidance to donors and funders that want to support nature-based solutions for climate mitigation. So that's the context in which we are launching the blueprint. As Vanessa said, this is beyond carbon credits, a blueprint for high-quality interventions that work for people, nature, and climate. And what we really want to help with this document is to differentiate current opportunities to implement nature-based solutions for climate mitigation in particular, and ensure that this financial support really focus on the right things to get us to transformational change. We want to move from a small scale to large scale and to really transform the landscapes where deforestation and nature loss is happening. So with that, I'm going to just provide our the definition that we are using for nature-based solutions for climate mitigation to contextualize how WWF is looking at these interventions to be successful. So we are calling nature-based solutions for climate mitigation to the interventions that deliver positive climate mitigation impacts and manage anticipated climate risk while equally delivering on human well-being and biodiversity benefit. This is important because what we are saying is nature-based solutions for climate mitigation, for it to be effective, for them to be effective, they need to simultaneously address these three and deliver these three values. We also want to bring attention of the needs of the landscapes and acknowledge that nature-based solutions for climate mitigation must be supported by different sources of finance. The size of the problem is daunting. Deforestation and nature loss is one of the crises, like the most complex crisis of our time, and therefore it requires different sources of finance. We need partnerships, we need all hands on deck, we need public and private collaboration, we need supply and demand collaboration, we need subnational and national collaboration, we need all hands on deck. And of course, a smaller subset of this might involve the creation of carbon credits when stakeholders have done their work at home in terms of addressing their footprint and going beyond. But for us to reach the moment of results, there's a lot of investments that need to happen to take us there in terms of results-based payments or credit generation. There's a lot of groundwork that needs to happen, and that's why we need to acknowledge and understand that for us to be able to have results, a wide diversity of the investments need to happen on the ground. So with that context, let's go to the blueprint, where we can see here what the report is all about. The first point we want to make through our blueprint is that nature-based solutions for climate mitigation must deliver for people, climate, and nature, as I mentioned, by design. This is important because we have seen some discussions around climate mitigation strategies that will have the co-benefits for people and nature. We are thinking about this issue in a different way. We are saying by design, you need to promote interventions and incorporate these metrics and expected outcomes in terms of benefits for nature and people, and plan accordingly. So it's not an afterthought, or it's not a co-benefit. Actually, in many cases, if done right, if we plan an intervention that will deliver for people and nature, the co-benefit will be climate in the medium and long term. The second point we want to highlight is the issue of scale. Scale definitely matters for these solutions. We need to implement a significant scale at the scale that the drivers operate, the drivers of nature and nature loss and deforestation operate. For us to be effective, we need to implement the interventions at that scale. So we really produce a change of systems transformation and the transition to low carbon development. And for this, we definitely need to support jurisdictional and/or landscape approaches, understanding what are the drivers in the landscape, in a given landscape, and plan the interventions that will tackle those drivers for us to really be effective. So we need to craft the interventions according to what is needed in a given context. And then for our third step in this blueprint is the issue that we need to prioritize landscape needs as opposed to tradable credits. And what we say here is that we need to really support activities that will have an immediate transformational impact and less transaction costs. And this has to do with the different needs in the landscape. If you understand the forces that operate in a jurisdiction or on a landscape level, then you can identify and characterize the interventions that are needed to tackle those drivers, and then understand what are the best sources of finance to support each of these interventions. So it's a different approach than just having as a starting point, I want to do a carbon project, because that can be done in a vacuum and can hinder the ability for us to actually transition to low carbon development, as opposed to looking at the landscape and understanding what are the drivers of deforestation, nature loss, and therefore what are the sources of emissions. So then you can find the different strategies and sources of finance and the right partners and the stakeholders that need to be engaged for us to be able to be effective at tackling them. And then finally, well, and in this one, obviously, what is interesting, thinking on identifying the different stakeholders that act in a given landscape, and that can be your levers for transformational change. It's going to be fundamental to look at the role of indigenous peoples and local communities. If we take a look from that perspective, that you can involve the right stakeholders by design in crafting the interventions that are needed to be successful, not only as an afterthought or as a beneficiary, which is important, but as co-partners, co-designers of intervention, and therefore also beneficiaries. And finally, the last point of the blueprint is that all these interventions need to be transparent, credible, and sustainable. It's going to be important for us to really catalyze and accelerate action in line with the Paris Agreement, that these interventions really are transparent and analyze and mitigate the risks that there are when you start an intervention on the ground. Consultation is going to be fundamental, and free, prior, and informed consent, in particular with indigenous peoples and local communities, is really a minimum requirement, but you need to do more, as I mentioned, not only as identifying them as a beneficiary, but actually as co-partners and co-designers. Then another risk is that there is no requirement at the moment to have transparent and strong and robust benefit sharing mechanisms, and this is going to be fundamental for the interventions to be robust and to be sustainable in the long term. And finally, there are other more technical risks that need to be taken care of. If you are a funder and you're a donor that want to go into this space, you need to understand technical issues such as carbon accounting, and the problem with inflated baselines. Just to name an example of the type of challenges at the technical level. So we need to, we want to encourage funders to work in methodological consistency, with the efforts that governments are doing, so we can have like one system and more transparency. Other issues, of course, to focus on in this step of the blueprint is the issue of sustainability and permanence. So how, when you are planning an intervention, you need to be looking at the sustainability of the intervention in the long term, and therefore have like a direct impact on the permanence of these emissions reductions. And the other point to consider, and with that I will wrap up, is communications around the outcomes of the interventions. It's going to be very important that all communications or claims are really credible and based in science, because this is what we need to be in line with the Paris Agreement. So that's our blueprint in a nutshell. The report goes in a little bit more of detail, but yeah, I just wanted to give you that overview. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Josefina. Thank you so much, and do feel free to download our report from our webpage, and you can find it with the title. Let me go back one step and introduce our panelists again here today. So we have Milagros Sandoval. She's the Director of Greenhouse Gas Mitigation at MINAM, Peru, the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources. Milagros, thank you for being here with us today. And Ingrid Reument, she's the Vice President for Global Communication at the Velux Group. So what I would like to hear from you both is your first reactions to the blueprint that Josefina has just presented. From Milagros, firstly, I would love to get your insights on the blueprint, Milagros, but from a very government perspective, what does this bring, and why it is important to have governments empowered to align the different financial sources. So over to you, Milagros.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here again, and also with all women panel. That's wonderful. Congratulations on that. Especially discussing about issues so technical sometimes that normally we are not the majority in the panel. I would like first to reflect on some of the issues that you mentioned and that Josefina has delivered in a nutshell related to what is expected and what is this process that definitely we're all learning by doing. This is not something, there's no one recipe to move forward on this process. There are different national circumstances that have to be considered in drafting or creating this new process related to how that can we link specifically work from the governments, including private sector, including civil society, including indigenous peoples. We have already some lessons learned about this process, but definitely scaling up, I think, and that's something that I would like to reflect on what has been presented. Scaling up is one of the challenges that we're facing, because this has been normally done, and especially in Peru, in specific projects, in specific areas. And how do we scale up? How do we bring the lessons learned from this process to an overall or a national policy? So maybe on that specific issue, I would like to maybe share some thoughts on how Peru is moving forward on this process. We are currently working on a nesting process that is trying to bring together different stakeholders in this process, including indigenous people, including private sector, including project developers, that can support and that can first understand what is this all about. Because obviously upscaling projects to a larger scale implies that we need to understand that there are other regulations that we need to comply with different criteria, with different methodologies that we need to work on, and that things have to shift so that in overall we can comply with national legislation. And I think the government's role in this process, specifically in the case of Peru, we're trying to implement and support and create the legal security and the legal framework necessary for this process to be clear. Because I think that's the main objective right now of the government of Peru, being clear about what the nesting process implies, what does the importance of upscaling what we have been doing on the ground, of bringing in different stakeholders, of including different guidelines, and giving clarity and transparency to the process. This, as Josefina mentioned, includes working on a benefit sharing mechanism that will be at the national scale, but that we have to identify what is the criteria to support the process. We have also submitted to the UNFCCC our updated reference level, which will give the framework for this nesting process as well. And we are working with different stakeholders in establishing criteria to identify those areas that, although could not be at risk, because this is also the issue about additionality, but that definitely have importance, value in the area. Biodiversity, identifying the co-benefits, identifying other things that areas of indigenous peoples that probably are right now not at risk, but that we need to conserve and to value. So that is something that we're working together with different stakeholders, and that includes capacity building process, and that also includes a very robust participatory process. Obviously, this is not easy. It takes time. It takes a lot of support from different organizations. It implies working with grassroots, with different partners, but it also implies clearly the link with the private sector in order to support and to bring together these ideas into process. So in overall, I think that this blueprint that has been shared definitely clarifies also this way forward. What are we expecting? Obviously, in each country, it will have to be clarified specifically with national circumstances, with different ideas that have been set, and what has happened during the last 10 or 15 years since we have been working on this. But definitely, I think that there is, not only there's a challenge, but there's an opportunity to bring in nature-based solutions related to mitigation and how this can support the livelihoods of the people that are living near nature. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Milagros. So I'd like to turn over now to Ingrid. And Ingrid, the Velux Group is really spearheading a different model, a different business model. You have a 1.5 degree aligned SBTI validated target, but you want to go above and beyond, and you want to contribute to local projects on the ground that have this more or the highest quality and integrity measures, but you also want to do that in partnership and collaboration with governments. And so I think that's really rare, I would say, and it's really putting a model forward. And so I'd love to hear from you, if you can describe a little bit more what the model entails and what are Velux motivations for engaging in this manner. Over to you, Ingrid.
Thank you very much, and also thank you for the invitation to be here. Sorry for being a little bit late, and I'm also very pleased to be in my first female panel here at the COP. So it's great. But I would, from our side, from Velux side, really welcome the efforts that WWF have made around making this blueprint. Because I think with all the discussions that there are out there around, you know them all, carbon credits, biodiversity, accusations of greenwashing, etc. We really need to have solid frameworks that we can rely on. And as far as I've seen, I've read through the document the other day, it looks extremely solid and very well thought through, but also quite understandable, even to people, like I'll include myself, who are not expert within the field. At least I get an overview of what it's all about. But if I take one step back, for those of you who don't know Velux, we produce roof windows. We're the global market leader within that segment. We're also so fortunate to be family and foundation owned, which might also explain why we have been able to take this kind of action, because we have a long-term perspective. And we have owners. I thought there was very little battery on it, so maybe that's it. I don't hope that was a clue. The moderator's clue. No, so we have this long-term perspective, and of course any private company needs to have owners that support the action that you want to take. But taking one step back, 4 years ago now, we sat down in the company and spent time on what was our next steps in terms of sustainability were going to be. And like all other companies, we start looking forward. How can we reduce our carbon footprint? So we decided quite quickly to sign up to the Science Based Targets Initiative, also the 1.5 degree scenario, which means that we will become fully carbon neutral as a company, but also that we will halve the CO2 from our value chain. And that is where the real difficult work lies, that is working with the entire value chain. But then we also had discussions, how can we go beyond? Because we think that we are in a privileged situation, so we can actually do more, and those who can do more, they should do more. So we started in this little group of 4 people. We're working intensely on this topic, talking about what are the big trends in society and how can we make them relevant. And we started talking about the responsibility that we have for past actions. Is it okay just to say from now on we will be good? Or do we actually have some responsibility for what we have done in the past? And I think that is the whole essence of course, the Me Too movement. That is that you cannot just say from tomorrow I'll behave well. There are maybe some things that you have responsibility for. And maybe that's the same for climate. So we sat down and we calculated how much CO2 have we emitted since we were founded in 1941 during the Second World War. That amounts to 4.3 million tons CO2. We spent a year on that calculation because it's not that easy, and we had it verified by the Carbon Trust in London. And then we added 25% buffer on top just to be on the safe side. And then we said, what if we could recapture that in some way or another? So we would basically take away or at least recapture our historical carbon footprint. And then next step was, how do we do that? And for a private company, that is just a jungle. There's so many providers out there of technological solutions and fast-growing trees and algae and things, and it's very, very difficult. So I would say it was more by chance that we got into a talk with WWF Denmark and spent a whole year together with WWF Denmark, sometimes day-long meetings talking about this topic. Could we do this in a way, capture the carbon, where we would also get the positive benefits in terms of biodiversity and also work with the social aspects? But it wasn't something that we had on our agenda first. We thought about climate, and then it was through the interaction with WWF that we understood, first learned about the biodiversity crisis, which we didn't know at the time. Now this is 2 years back. So I think we, at least, and personally I wasn't aware of the scale of it. But also the ability to make climate mitigation or carbon projects which has a have a stronger impact, so also impact in the biodiversity aspect and social, the local communities. So that was a long story, but just to explain a little bit to you, what is the decision-making process inside a company? And this is exactly why I think the blueprint is fantastic, because it will shortcut all that internal investigation and etc. And here you have actually a model for how to do it.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. Thank you for the story, for the motivation, and also for mentioning from the outside that it is needed to cut through the noise, right? I think that every voice must be heard, and every voice has something to say, but also we need to understand and have clear criteria to distinguish the good from the bad, right? And I think that's exactly what we're trying to do with this blueprint and the accompanying documents, right? So the NDCs we want, all of the methodology, the criteria. So that's not only a quantitative methodology, but also a qualitative methodology. Then we have the corporate blueprint that also outlines the model that Velux is spearheading, and then the accompanying document, which is this blueprint that talks about the interventions on the ground and the quality and how they can be aligned. Of course, it's a first step. We have to do more still. So going back to Milagros, within this trying to connect the different dots, there's a need for governments to also be playing a more active role in ensuring the integrity of this funding, the different funding sources that come to your governments. And sometimes it is very, very difficult, right? Because it's the tragedy of the commons, right? Once you put more stringent, probably the money is going to go elsewhere. So it requires political leadership, and political leadership for us is it's valiant decisions, right? Is really going beyond your comfort zone to say this is what I want flows to look like in my country. So from the perspective of Peru, why is that so important? Why the role of the government is so important to ensure the integrity of financial flows, but also what does Peru need? What does Peru need from civil society, from the actual conference of the parties as well, to also back this up, and from the corporate world? Milagros, back to you.
Thank you very much. Maybe I would like to start with what do we need, but maybe reflecting on what has been said. I think that in Peru we are very lucky because we have an indigenous people representative organizations that are very, very involved in this process and that have been strengthening their capacities and that are very propositive of what they want and how they want it. And they have made different proposals, especially something that WWF also supports for indigenous peoples, that is the Red Indigenous Amazon initiative. That is, in a nutshell, how the indigenous peoples see or expect funding to support their indigenous lands and their indigenous territories and their proposals. And part of that has been reflected also in our policies, because we are, with the funding we're having right now from different donors, we are bringing in funding especially to title their lands, which is the first step to reduce deforestation in the country. So definitely I would like to highlight that that we are very lucky because we have a very propositive civil society, indigenous peoples, and a private sector that is understanding all of this, and that definitely is bringing in a lot of their knowledge and a lot of their know-how to this process. But in overall, definitely there are decisions that have to be made. In Spanish we say arreglando la casa. That is when you put the rules. Definitely it is difficult. It implies a lot of support. So definitely having the support from different organizations, from civil society, from our indigenous peoples, but especially not only the support, but that they are part of the process, that they appropriate the process, because this is not only a process that is of the government of Peru, it's a process of Peru, in overall of the country. Because what we want is that what the emission reductions that we have in the country are have a link to the mandates of the UNFCCC, have clarity over the accounting rules, reducing the possibility of risks, reversals, avoiding double counting, but definitely that they're also, and this is also based on a participatory process. So that's why we are putting all our efforts to clarify the legal framework. We have a national climate change law and its regulations, and we're working on the specific regulations that will clarify all the process so that everybody has the clarity over what is expected and what is the process that they have to follow. But what do we ask in overall, and especially for the private sector, we ask them that they can fund and they can support through their investments social and environmental impact. What we want is to support the livelihoods of the people and that this is sustainable in time. This is not a one-time funding, but that it can support the capacities, the livelihoods of the people that are living there. And also that they can bring in their know-how, their capacities. We understand the private sector has a lot to bring into this process, so definitely that is something that we hope that can be reached in the participatory process that we're working now on. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Milagros. And connecting to what Ingrid said, and Josefina, I would like to get your perspective on this. Also to kind of underline really the tripartite benefits of the blueprint, right? Not one without the other, and that is something. Of course, that is part of the integrity. It's a crucial part of the integrity. So. And talking about the biodiversity angle of this, how do you see the blueprint advancing specifically on that angle that is quite important, and it's in many of the safeguards, but actually making sure that it does deliver on the ground is important. So how does the blueprint advance on that piece of the puzzle? Back to you.
Thanks, Vanessa. That's a very important question, and one that is very prominently front and center in the blueprint, because what we are trying to do is seizing the opportunity and the momentum around nature-based solutions to channel it to the interventions we need on the ground. So the blueprint is clear to focus on landscapes, and the reason why is because we feel like if we are not able to scale up, as Milagros was saying, from a like isolated intervention, or like it can be like a great project, but it's not like put in the context of the larger jurisdiction or landscape, and it's not really contributing to achieve the objectives of that landscape in terms of transition into low carbon development or addressing deforestation and nature loss. This project might not be very consequential in the long term, right? Like we want all hands on deck and alignment of interventions that will get us to where we need to go. And sorry. Okay, sorry. Let's wait for a little second. Sorry, so going back, I think that's what the blueprint makes the case of looking at the landscape needs, and it's because of that, because we need to have a strategy at the landscape level or jurisdictional level that will incorporate benefits for people and nature by design. So it has to be compatible. It's not only the climate aspect of it, or the entry point should not be only the climate aspect, but simultaneously and equally at the same level, understanding what is the sweet spot of the intervention in the different places of the landscape that can deliver on the three values. And this is important because if you don't promote an intervention that will bring benefits for people would not engage. it might engage at the duration of the project, but after the project ends, then we are going back to business as usual, and we cannot afford that. So what we are trying to do is direct all this momentum and take opportunity of the interest of nature-based solutions to do this right and in a sustainable way in the long run. So that has to do with engaging, designing for multiple benefits. So to start with, and that's what we're doing with Velux, is not like only looking at carbon values, but actually understanding where in the landscape we are going to invest and what are the drivers of nature loss, so we can design to tackle those drivers. And by tackling those drivers and the drivers of deforestation, then we will have outcomes in terms of climate. And by the way, not only climate mitigation, but if we do it right in this like more integral approach, we will also have adaptation benefits, right? So design for multiple benefits, involve the communities, because the communities are the ones that are on the ground. They have the local knowledge of what is best. For example, in terms of restoration, they are the best position to do restoration right. They have the knowledge of the native species, what works, what doesn't work, where it works. So they are drivers of meaningful change, and they need to be at the center of this as partners. And then of course, institutionalize the social and environmental safeguards. As my colleagues also say, this is going to be important, because it should not be like you care about nature just as oh, okay, I need to tick the box. It actually, for this to be successful and sustainable in the long term, you have to incorporate social and environmental safeguards by design in your intervention, and understand in the landscape what are the different combination of policies and measures that you need to put in place, and therefore connected to the different sources of finance. And then, to deliver on nature, I think is key to focus first on reducing emissions from deforestation and from nature loss, and then, of course, complement with the restoration of the landscape. But we are still losing forests by the minute. We have lost already 40% of the forest of the world. So that's where you need to go, to the complex landscape deforestation fronts, where the deforestation is happening. It's messy, it's complex, but it's needed, and we need to protect what is still standing. And then the last point I wanted to make also, in terms of like promoting these three values, that's why we in the blueprint go further exploring this issue of the scale. Because again, if you don't look at the drivers and at the level they operate in a landscape, it's going to be very hard to be effective in the interventions. So definitely prioritize landscape scale activities and the impact. And there's many ways to do that. Milagros was sharing the experience of Peru in providing the guidelines for nesting these different interventions, and I think many countries are facing these challenges on a fragmented landscape of different interventions that are not connecting to each other, or that are not aligning to contribute to the vision, to the landscape or the jurisdiction. And we cannot afford that fragmentation. We need to have cohesion, we need to have alignment, we need to have a common goal, clarified with the help of the government, and then all the stakeholders that interact in the landscape and in the territory need to align to that goal, common goal, and scale up and accelerate action.
Thank you so much, Josefina. And yesterday we were actually presenting on a nature-based solutions report, the enabling environment, and nature-based solutions, and that's why we incorporate centrally this concept here, is community-based and community-led, right? So that is a crucial thrust, and I really very much like the way you put this, because what we're trying to do is structural change, and that structural change means durability as well, right? So it's sustainability that is a buzzword, but it's true. It's about durability. It's about the synergistic impacts, and it's about long lasting change. And so in that note, Ingrid, I want to ask you, part of the cooperation that we have with you, you've been open to be really thinking about our interventions at the landscape level, trying to tackle the drivers of deforestation loss, etc. And another piece of that is of course working with others. So I would like to really understand also what are Velook's future plans in working with others, bringing others to this contribution model, being that agent of change within your industry and possibly beyond your industry. Back over to you, Ingrid.
No, thank you very much. And I think looking at the next steps, I think now with the blueprint, we have a very strong document that we can refer to, because if there's one thing that the private sector doesn't like, it's risk. Private sector doesn't like risk. That's the whole model is based around not risking. And of course, luckily, so increasingly also having a strong impact. But I think it's important to understand how those two parts go hand in hand. And the whole risk part is so important, because if you are like we are, we truly want to have a positive impact, and there's only good intentions. And we know that, of course, we are sticking our nose out there with a 20-year-long partnership working with historical carbon capture, which is a new concept. So there's a lot of risk for us to be accused of greenwashing. And we cannot cannot afford that, in the sense, not in a monetary sense, but more in the sense of our culture and our brand and our employees, etc. So I think that the risk element is very important, that when the private sector enters, you don't want to end up in a situation where you have a negative coverage, because you are actually trying to do good, and at the same time you want to make sure you have a proper impact. So it's not just, oh yes, they financed some tree planting and then they left and then now it's all, you know, no one wants that anymore, I think. So I think that that's important. We have had, since we launched the partnership with WWF, we've had an overwhelming interest from companies, large and small, global companies, Danish companies, etc., really being interested in what is it you're doing, how are you doing it, why are you thinking this way, what is this thing about biodiversity, etc. So I think it has worked in the sense of opening people's eyes to working with carbon capture in using the nature-based solutions approach, and not just as a technological way, which is what is mainly being discussed at the moment, is all the technological ways that we can capture carbon. So I think that that's the starting point. And then we are together with the WWF trying to get other companies to be interested. Our role is, of course, trying to explain what we've done, why we're doing, and why also we see WWF as a very credible and strong partner, which I think also takes out the risk element if you have a strong partner who has expertise and understanding. And then, of course, we hope that more companies will follow suit. But of course, there are some barriers also in terms of the scale issue. For us, it hasn't been a challenge because we can afford it. But if you're a small, medium-sized company doing projects at scale for a long time, horizon is difficult. So there might be other models that have to be thought through, where maybe governments can play a role of guaranteeing or something like that.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. And we're running out of time, but I do want to leave the opportunity for Milagros to do a final remark, a final reflection, and in the case, if Josefina, if you want to make any final reflections.
Thank you very much. I think I would like to bring back something that Josefina just mentioned in her previous remarks, that is, we need to protect what is still standing. And I think that is one of the main priorities that we have in the country, in Peru, to support this process, but giving to support and continue protecting what is still standing. Our Amazon is very important. It brings or it supports the livelihoods of many people, including indigenous peoples. It has a enormous biodiversity, and a lot of ecosystem services, not only on mitigation but also on adaptation. And I would just like to reflect that we are working on this process, that everybody is invited to support the process. It's a participatory process that is trying to be integral and support the strengthening capacities of all, but that is trying to bring legal security, transparency, and through that process reduce risks. reduce risks that definitely are part of the sector, but that definitely we want to engage with them, we want to address them, and in order for that, so that we can have private sector that is engaged, that wants to have social and environmental impact in the country, and that can give sustainability to the process that we're leading as the government of Peru. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Milagros. Any final words from your end, Josefina?
Gracias. Thank you, Vanessa. I think from my side, just to invite everybody to take a look at the blueprint. You can download it online. As Milagro said a few remarks ago, this is a very fluid space. We are all learning by doing, and we want to hear your feedback about the blueprint and about your experiences. It would be important to connect we are always trying to really have a reality check in every step we do, especially in things like this that are technically complex. So yeah, welcome feedback, invite you to download the blueprint, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Josefina. So I very, very much enjoyed this conversation, and I think that a lot of my reflections is about grounding, right? Is grounding what we're doing, and having the ground as our North Star, and those impacts on the ground, and then we start to create the interventions at different levels. And I think that principle of grounding must cross-cut all of the partnerships we do, right? And good partnerships. We are all taking risks. Peru is taking risks, and we have to, definitely work together to give clarity in terms of what is really sufficiently ambitious, sufficiently credible, and with sufficient integrity. And I think that's what we're trying to do. And as Josefina mentioned, we're evolving, and we're checking all the time on the ground, and we want to do that. It's also fantastic to see this all-women panel. Thank you for that and for mentioning that. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And do download the report, and have a great day.